Hi, psych students. I want to go through the motivation, emotion, and stress review so you are ready for the upcoming test. It will be 28 multiple choice questions, one FRQ. The FRQ will have 7 points, and 3 of those will be prior terms. So, very familiar with what we've had for the last several tests, actually. So let's start with theories of emotion. The drive reduction theory, this is Clark Hull. Remember, he says that motivation comes from satisfying our basic needs and return our body to homeostasis. So our tension decreases when our needs are met. But these are our basic needs, our basic primary needs. Things like food, water, and sleep. Those need to be met before the secondary needs. And so the drive comes from decreasing that tension by getting food, by getting water, and then we can meet the secondary. Then we are motivated to meet those secondary needs, such as money, esteem, achieving good grades. Those are learned drives that come after the physiological needs are satisfied. The goal of the drive reduction theory really is to return our bodies to this balanced internal state, to achieve homeostasis. So remember, this is very much of a basic physiological drive, a basic physiological motivation. The optimal arousal theory, another theory of motivation, says that motivation may increase or decrease arousal, but peak arousal is necessary for our highest performance. Now, keep in mind, when we talk about arousal, we're basically use a different word like energy. We want to have just the right amount of energy. You can see in that chart there, performance is the y-axis and arousal is the x-axis. If we're too bored, we're not going to have good performance. If we're too anxious, we have too high anxiety, too high of arousal, we're not going to be able to focus. We want just the optimal level for our best peak performance. The Yerkes-Dodson law, it works off the optimal arousal theory, and basically they realized, they tested it enough, that performance increases up to a point, but then it begins to decrease. So your performance is really best at that optimal mark. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is Abraham Maslow. He talks about the level of needs that must be met before advancing to higher level needs. The bottom of the pyramid, make sure you understand this pyramid very well. Those are the physiological needs. I can tell this, I did this in pencil, and so it's a little bit hard to see. So the physiological needs are at the bottom. And again, those are like those primary needs, right? When we talked about the drive reduction, those physiological needs. Then once those are satisfied, we can move up to the safety needs. Once our safety needs are satisfied, then we can go up and achieve love and belongingness. If we have love and a feeling of belongingness, then we can get up to self-esteem. These esteem needs, those are, now we're getting into the secondary drives, right? And then finally for Maslow, the highest level is self-actualization. And Maslow will say that not everybody will get to self-actualization in their life. You oftentimes, you might have achieved a level of esteem, and then something will happen and you kind of need to go back, and maybe a relationship broke apart, and so you have to go back, and then your esteem is kind of shattered and you have to find love again. And you might not ever achieve self-actualization of that kind of knowing not only who you are, but what your purpose is, and how you are going to give of yourself to be the best version of yourself. There is a motivation for hunger. This is a whole kind of separate idea of motivation. Know that hunger is both physiological and psychological. There's a lot of evidence that it's strongly psychological, but we'll talk about both of those. The biggest drive for our motivation for hunger in the brain, at least, comes from the hypothalamus. The motivation from the brain and neurotransmitters, especially dopamine, that feel-good neurotransmitter that that feeling of just like happiness. I don't want to say euphoria, but the real pleasant feeling you get from getting some sort of reward. The hypothalamus may actually have a larger effect on eating than the stomach. Now, keep in mind, both of those are physiological, but considering that the hypothalamus is in the brain, a lot of it could be psychologically driven. So the lateral hypothalamus, that stimulates our desire to eat. It says, hey, you're hungry. You should start eating. Go look for some food. Remember, let's go back again to those primary drives. The ventromedial hypothalamus signals a signal in our brain says we are full and we are satisfied. You're done. You've had enough to eat and you're not hungry. The set point theory, also a motivation theory, is when we're talking about hunger, that we have an individual weight thermostat, and everybody has their own kind of thermostat of their natural body weight. And it works with our metabolism to maintain our weight. So the goal should really be to just stay at the weight you are. Some people, though, feel like they need to lose weight or gain weight, and both of those can be done, but it's how it's done. It can't be done quickly. It can't be done rapidly gaining weight or losing weight, because we see that the body will fight against that natural body weight. It can be done, but it needs to be done appropriately and understanding that your body wants to maintain its set point. Oftentimes, when we experience eating disorders, we're working against that set point theory. So eating disorders such as anorexia, bulimia, and obesity, it's not surprising that in the United States we have the highest numbers of all of those eating disorders. But in a nation like the United States, where we are very fast-paced and socially driven, we face a lot of disorders like that. I want to talk specifically about anorexia. That's a fear of becoming overweight and having a distorted body image. This is especially true in young women, but it's usually not about food. People who become anorexic, it's usually about some aspect of control, and it feels to people like that's the one thing that they can control in their lives. So it's not so much about the food, it's more about the perception of my body and that I can do something about this one thing. I can control this. BMI, when we measure BMI, we consider over 30 to be obese, under 18 to be underweight. These are, I'm not going to say just random numbers. They're definitely not random, but they are just a number. However, we have to have a starting point. If we don't have any sort of measurement, it's very difficult to categorize eating disorders. Industrial organizational psychology. This is workplace psychology. When people feel motivated, when they feel like they are respected in their workplace, they're equal and have a purpose for their efforts. If managers, business owners, leaders of a group can make people feel like what they're doing has an outcome and an achievable outcome, people are more motivated to work toward a goal and for success. Locus of control. This is when we talk about how we're motivated to seek outcomes in the environment. So outcomes in the environment are motivated by two things, either external motivation, sometimes we call it extrinsic. That's when things are beyond our control, they're out of our control. That is not as meaningful as a locus, as a motivator for doing things or accomplishing something, because it comes from beyond. Internal or intrinsic motivation is something that's within our control. We can control our destiny, and that comes from ourselves. That's more powerful because we're the ones pushing for it to be success, to complete, to get it done. When it can come from ourselves, it tends to be more inherently, more naturally achievable. Positive psychology, this is Martin Seligman's theory that happiness, well-being, resilience, that's an important one, being able to bounce back when we've faced dilemmas or difficulties. That happiness, well-being, and resilience comes from a positive mindset and environment. So it's easy to say, well, just look at the happy side of it. But if you're surrounded by a very negative environment, an environment that does not see the good, then it can be very trying. It can be very difficult. But Martin Seligman says that we can have a positive frame of mind. Some theories of emotion. I want you to know these three. These are the basic three. The other ones are not quite as important. I'm not saying that the College Board won't ask them. These are the three that's on the test, and these are the three that are likely to show up on the exam. So the James Lange theory of emotion says that our physical response comes first, and then the emotional response. So we first have a physical response, like we jump, and then emotion kind of comes in a whoosh after that because of the physical arousal. The Cannon-Bard theory of emotion says that physical and emotional responses happen at the same time. They're simultaneous but separate. They're not the same thing, but they are happening in conjunction at the same time with each other. So we start trembling and we feel scared at the same time. The Schachter-Singer theory, that's the two-factor, and I'm not sure if you can see here, I underlined the C in factor. It's all about the cognitive appraisal. So we think about the situation and we label the physical response based on the experience of emotion. So we realize, there's a word, realize, we're thinking about what am I feeling, why am I shaking, why am I trembling, and then we explain in our minds why I'm doing that. Oh, I'm doing that because I am scared. I'm doing that because I'm excited. I'm doing that because I'm nervous. And so we label that physical response. The facial feedback system, this is Paul Ekman's theory that facial feedback can produce changes in emotional feelings. For many of us, we together did the cartoons with the pencil, whether we were grinning or frowning. Paul Ekman says that the more we smile, the more we receive smiles back in a positive kind of mind. It probably is very close to Martin Seligman's understanding of positive psychology, and that changes our perspective on things. So start smiling more and you actually can maybe feel different. The facial expressions can vary by perspective, Ekman says, but there are about 7 basic emotions, and a smile is the most basic of all of them. The stress response system, this is Hans Seil. He talks about these phases of stress and the general adaptation syndrome. I should have written that in there. General adaptation syndrome, that's what GAS stands for. The first stage of stress is alarm. The first phase is alarm. That's when our sympathetic system goes up. It's activated. Now, it might not be such a shocking, such a high activation that you even realize it, but it could just be this constant increased level of arousal of some sort in our sympathetic nervous system. The next stage phase is resistance. And I don't know if you can tell, but I put in parentheses, you can't maintain this high level of resistance, of this sympathetic nervous system elevation, resistance. So we can sit in resistance for a long time, but we can't stay there forever. Our sympathetic system cannot hang out in that stage forever, because eventually we will get to exhaustion. And exhaustion is when the body has used all of its reserves And the sympathetic nervous system just must come down, and our body will result in something like illness, collapse, at the very worst, death. Stressors. I'm sorry, this is really hard to see. Stressors, we categorize stressors as catastrophes, and those are acute stressors. Those are things that need to be dealt with immediately. Everything else kind of has to be put on hold while we deal with catastrophes. Significant life changes, those can be acute or chronic stressors. Remember, acute is when you have to deal with it right away. Chronic means when it goes on. And so significant life changes could be both. And then hassles. And hassles are the day-to-day things, the day-to-day activities and life situations that we just have to deal with all the time. And those are typically chronic stressors. So we have an appraisal of stressors. We talk about the approach conflict. That's when there are two desirable options and we have to choose between two good things, which means that we have to not choose one of them. And that can be a stressor. That can be difficult sometimes. The approach avoidance conflict is when we have one desirable, one good option, but it brings about one undesirable consequence. So we want to do it, but then what happens because of it? And so that's probably the most that we would see, I would imagine, in our lives. We want this, but then what comes after it is undesirable. And the avoidance. This is when we have two undesirable options and we have to choose between the least bad of the two, and you don't really want to choose either, but you have to choose one, and you're not comfortable making that choice, but it's one that you have to do. That's the avoidance conflict. All right, so that's it. Of course, if you have any questions, give me an email or we can talk about it tomorrow. See you later. Goodbye.